to the state of cyber warfare. We're going to go over a lot of statistics and kind of give you a preview of what we have discovered at Armis. My name is Steve Gyurindak. I'm the Chief Technical Officer of Operational Technology and Networking at Armis. Paul?
Hi everyone, Paul Griswold. I head product management for Honeywell Cybersecurity business unit.
So if you don't know what Armis is, that's okay. A lot of people don't. Essentially what we are is a tool that discovers every asset on networks, everything they're doing, every IP connection that's being made, every protocol being used, how much data is being sent. That's all actually captured in the cloud. We anonymize the data. We have more than 50% of the Fortune 100. So we have incredible amounts of crowdsourced data on activities, devices, and what I'm going to go over is a survey that we did in conjunction with the data that we've captured about what has happened in cyber warfare in the last couple of years. So what is cyber warfare? Well, essentially cyber warfare is a deliberate act to either terrorize, to steal, or to somehow hurt other individuals. One of the nastiest things that are happening, especially when we talk about ICS environments, is the weaponization of the ICS environments and how they're actually being used now to try to hurt people physically. Obviously the conflict in Ukraine has basically made it open season to try every cyber warfare weapon that they can on any type of critical infrastructure. So when we surveyed leading analysts, they predict by 2025, people will be getting killed from cyber warfare attacks. So it's an incredibly serious topic that what we find is not really addressed a lot. So let's kind of take a look at kind of what we've seen. So Stuxnet, everyone knows about it. That's kind of the very first of, and I would say the father or a mother of almost all the modern ICS attacks that we have. They're almost all a permutation with the exception of WannaCry. So, Havoc's, Black Energy, they were both direct descendants of Stuxnet. They're just modified. If you look, one of the really nasty ones that happened was here in Florida last year and a half ago, where a hacker came in and decided to turn up the fluoride levels. Had that not been caught, and that got caught kind of randomly by a process engineer who said, okay, something's wrong here. But had he not caught it, it was going to be at lethal levels. So, these attacks are happening all the time, and they're just getting more and more complex on how they do. We have a natural thing going on, right? And I'm sure all of you have approached us of digitalization or digital transformation. The ability for taking environments that were predominantly controlled environments and extracting some data from them so you can use it to increase your productivity, so you can understand your supply chain, understand your management of change processes a lot better, so that you can also optimize your maintenance. What that unfortunately has done is in poorly configured environments, that's allowed a way in for a lot of these things, as well as some of the more advanced phishing, spear phishing techniques that are being used to try to compromise people that actually are in the control environment. So we conducted a survey over the last year. We surveyed over 6,000 IT and security professionals, so worldwide. We have reports on this, and you can find it at armis.com/cyberwarfare. Basically, we looked at every major region around the world and surveyed them, and here are the results. So from a global finding, 1/3 of companies that we surveyed, the participants, basically said that they're not taking the threat of cyber warfare seriously. They don't think it's going to impact them. It's not something that they think about at all. They don't have contingency plans for it. However, they contradict themselves later on by acknowledging that what's going on when the Ukraine incident started, that they saw an increase of attacks, and so did we, by the way. So you can see the statistics. We actually saw an uptick of over, it's on another slide, over 15%, it's down on the bottom, from our studies, from the data we get from our customers, uptick as soon as the Ukrainian conflict started. So this was not just Russian hacking groups and nation states going after Ukraine. The world itself, the cyber world, took it as its open season to attack everyone, right? When we zoom in on the sea level, and we look at the folks that really experienced it, and should alarm some of the folks in the room, the top people were people that produced food that were attacked. And then you can see telecommunications came in second, then automotive, retail, and technology. But food and beverage was the #1 increase in attacks. And what did we end up having after the Ukrainian conflict? We had supply chain constraints and we had food issues, right? And we're all dealing with the outcome of the increase in prices from it. One of the bigger things was some companies seized up what they were doing. So they had journeys that they were going to digitally transform themselves, gain those productivity and operational efficiency. But when this started happening, they said, no, we're going to put that on hold. So while they say they don't worry about it, at the same time, they're stopping anything that might expose them more. So you can see over 55% stopped or paused their digitalization efforts. Trying to think which ones are good to point out. I think the biggest one here is, while people 1/3 said they didn't take it seriously, 4/5 said they're going to invest more in cybersecurity. Even with the declining, potential recession coming and the declines we've had, the slowing of growth, they still, 4 out of 5 are going to still invest in cybersecurity. So it's a real thing, even if they kind of don't acknowledge it. Now, in the USA, one of the biggest things that was curious was that over 70% of the companies we interviewed in the US say they have been a victim of a cyber incident. And over half of them had to report it. Now this is, if you've been doing this a long time like I have, this is amazing that people are actually finally admitting. I remember working with some very large customers that we were seeing active attacks and they would not acknowledge that there were attacks. They didn't want to do it because they didn't want to scare their stockholders. They didn't want their board to know about it. What's nice is the culture in the US has really changed. And admitting that things are happening is incredibly important for our progress of being able to stop those things. So you see over 63 have reported to authorities. I'm trying to think of some other ones. Yeah, the bottom one is really interesting. So, and this just reflects the US culture, right? So what are the #1 thing that the folks are worried about in a cyber attack? That the elections will be messed up. So that just tells our political, what's going on. That is not the case around the world, by the way. Well, that is a localized to the US. When we look a little bit further into it, over 94% of companies believe they have sensitive data that people would want. So it's ironic, right? Because at one point they're saying they have sensitive data, but people are embracing the cloud, which people are saying can be less secure. At the same time, they're not saying that cybersecurity or cyber warfare is something that they're concerned about. So you can see a lot of contradictions. And the bottom one is really interesting about ransomware. So almost half of the companies pay for ransomware. When it happens, they have a policy, they're going to pay. Which again is up tremendously. If you had taken this survey 4 years ago, I would say 9 out of 10 companies would say they would never pay a ransom. But now, because ransomware is so prevalent, people not only have cyber insurance, but they actually have processes and procedures for when they have a ransomware attack. So what can you do? So this should really not come as a huge surprise to anyone. The very first thing you need to do is you need to acknowledge that this can happen to you and you need to have a plan. And you need to actually exercise and practice that plan. Part of the practicing that plan, the very first thing is, when you do acknowledge that you have something happening, what is your plan to isolate that event, to prevent that event from spreading, right? That's the second thing you really need to have. Third, pretty simple, you need a good backup strategy. When it comes to ransomware, if you want to try to avoid a lot of impact of that, a backup strategy will help you immensely. And the final one from our good friend Kevin Mitnick is have a good cybersecurity training program. So if you don't invest in one of those and send out random spear phishing, like happens to us at Armis all the time, you really should, because it exposes the users that are more susceptible to doing that. In one of the studies that Cyber Reason, I think it was, had put out, they basically said that when they do these spear phishing and phishing attempts, that 80% of the people that do it are the same group of people. So they're able to see exactly, basically these people aren't learning, so they're able to put them through more stringent testing. This allows you at that point to at least understand where your security gaps are, not from a technological standpoint, but from a human standpoint, which is how 90% of all cyber warfare happens, is actually through human beings. It's not through the elaborate hacking schemes we see on TV. They're mostly malware somewhere that a human being installs by accident. That, I think, we'll turn over to Paul.
Great. Thanks, Steve.
Yep.
So the report and the findings that Armis showed here really caught our eye at Honeywell, just because of the completeness and the thoroughness and the rigor that went into doing the survey. Over 6,000 respondents. That's very good. It's hard to get people to respond to these types of things. So getting 6,000 people around the world was certainly impressive. The other thing that I think is interesting is the concern that people have is so great that they're actually stopping or pausing digital transformation projects in some cases. This is not a sustainable strategy, unfortunately. You can't stop or pause your digital transformation strategy, because a lot of times that's where your next competitive advantage can come from. So by pulling all of that data together and figuring out the right mix and the right optimizations and things like that, that can't be something that gets stopped by cybersecurity concerns. So that just, I think, corresponds with the results of people who are planning on spending more money, because they realize that even though there are threats out there, got to press on and got to continue to have that competitive advantage when it comes to digital transformation. So a couple of things that we are seeing. All right, we'll see what happens. Can we go to the next slide, please? Here we go, thank you. So a couple of megatrends that we're seeing here at Honeywell when it comes to cybersecurity. Obviously, increased threats to OT environments. And what we're finding is that sometimes these are directly in the OT environments themselves. Sometimes they're in the systems that surround the OT environments. So I'll give you an example with the pipeline attack that was in the news last year. According to what's been published on that, the attack wasn't actually on the OT system itself. It was on the billing system. So rather than going after the OT system itself, the attackers went after the thing that gets you paid for what the OT system makes. The thing about that is when it comes to deciding what to do, if you're on the receiving end of an attack, if the OT system is down, you know down to the minute how much money you're losing. So when you compare that to potentially paying a ransom or potential cybersecurity insurance payouts and things like that, it becomes a pretty clear black and white decision. So important to keep that in mind. The OT systems are certainly under attack, but all the systems that surround it are also under attack because they directly affect the OT systems themselves. We are also seeing a big shift of responsibility for cybersecurity programs move over to, say, the CISO organization, the C-suite. Sometimes CISOs are even reporting directly up to the board on cybersecurity preparedness and incidents and things like that. This is a relatively big shift, especially in OT type of environments, because while in the past people certainly weren't doing nothing, there was definitely kind of a separation between IT and OT. And the reason that often occurred was because IT years ago came in, brought their shiny, fancy IT tools into the OT environment, knocked over a bunch of systems, and were never invited back. So what happened is that you kind of had policies in place, but you didn't necessarily have those checks and balances and verification to make sure that the individual OT environments, plants, what have you, were actually following those policies. That's something that's certainly changing, and unfortunately, ransomware is one of the main drivers of that. When you see, as a CEO or a member of a board, on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, several days in a row, the fallout of a ransomware attack, you're obviously going to ask some questions, and you're going to probably drive some more accountability in terms of what the company's doing to make sure you're not the next one on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Regulations, we're certainly seeing this as well. As with most cybersecurity regulations, they seem to start in Europe and then move over to other parts of the world. So we certainly are seeing with some of the executive orders and whatnot that have come out in the past year that regulation or other types of governance showing up to help drive these things. And then finally, from a vendor perspective, we certainly are seeing IT companies try to get into the OT space. So if you're a big IT company, already have a lot of business with a customer of yours, naturally the next step is, how can I expand that out? Let's go to the OT environments. Some are doing a pretty good job, others are not so much. It's a rebranding exercise, but it's the same IT tool underneath the covers that it's always been, and as a result, you can run into issues when you start to try to deploy that. There's so many things we run into when we consult with customers, and a lot of it has to do with just kind of playing psychologist between the IT and the OT folks, just because there's so much history there, and even though both groups want to do the right thing, ultimately their objectives are very different. So let's go to the next slide, please. The clicker here seems to no longer work. So a couple of stats of our own from Honeywell. So we do a USB report every year on USB threats for industrial environments. Reason being is because USB is still very prevalently used in these environments. On the IT side, you can disable USB pretty effectively. And when I say USB, I'm really talking about USB storage, but you can disable that pretty effectively and have other secure ways of moving files around through a Dropbox type solution or something like that. In OT, that generally doesn't work. So as a result, these devices, these USB storage devices, are still very prevalent, and we are seeing through our research an increase in threats this way. Stuxnet, it's an oldie but a goodie. It was introduced by USB. And that's still a vector that many attackers are using. So using 81% of malware capable of causing some sort of industrial control interruption, 52% specifically designed to use removable media, and then 51%, once it's in there, it's designed to establish some sort of remote access connection out to the attacker so they can change their techniques or launch various attacks, things like that. So USB is still a very prevalent threat in OT environments and probably will be for years to come. If we go to the next slide, please. Some differences here. So this kind of goes back to the IT versus OT type of approaches. I won't read all of these, but you can just kind of see there's several differences between the two environments and the objectives of the people who are running it. I mean, if you look at just say that impacts column, on the IT side, economic and legal, you certainly don't want to be the subject of a news report on ransomware. You certainly don't want your IP to end up on the dark web, and these are all obviously very bad things. But how you quantify that is kind of difficult. With OT processes, you know exactly how much money you're losing. And unfortunately, if things go terribly wrong, the cost is, can often be human life. So stakes are just different. Skills is another big area that we run into a lot as well. And I don't think it's a secret that there's a big gap in cybersecurity skills in general. I think, depending on the stats, and even today, where we're in a bit different economic times than we were a couple of years ago, I still think there's only about 40% of OT cybersecurity jobs where there's qualified people to fill them. So for every job, you have half an applicant, a little less than half an applicant who would be qualified to fill that job. It becomes even more challenging when you talk about having that cybersecurity capability or experience along with OT experience and knowing how those two work together. That's even a harder thing to find and fill. Can we go to the next slide, please? So if we could just go ahead and click here. So every customer is going to be on a different journey and a different point in their journey. There are many companies out there that are doing exceedingly well with their cybersecurity programs on the OT side. Others are, still kind of at the fundamentals. They may have IT licked very well, and they have good tools and established processes and, modern software, things like that to manage their IT security programs. OT, people are starting, oftentimes where IT was sometimes even up to 10 or 15 years ago. So when we work with clients, this is really kind of the first thing we work to establish is, where are you on your journey, knowing that everyone is going to be at a different point. So when we talk about the minimum fundamentals, these are things like doing assessments of your networks, making sure you know where your assets are, making sure you understand the vendors behind those assets, making sure you understand what they do, and kind of the basics and that. Antivirus and patching, again, there's certainly many OT environments out there that don't do antivirus even today. So having those capabilities with patching, and then Steve mentioned this one as well. Automated local backups. When it comes to ransomware, oftentimes a good solid backup is your best hope of getting back up and running quickly without having to actually pay the ransom. So not only making sure you have policies in place for backups, but you're actually making sure they're working. You're actually trying them out every once in a while to make sure they restore properly and all the things that go along with that. If we could go to the next one. As you get into the recommended, this is where you get into things like regular vulnerability scanning, USB media protection, and things like that. And you have things around log collection and all the other things that go with good cybersecurity operations just in general. If we click one more time here on the advanced, this is where you get into things like pen testing and red team, blue team, and maybe having a SOC, maybe outsourcing your SOC to a managed security service provider and whatnot. Interesting part, especially if you're kind of come from more of the IT side, your head is probably instantly going to go over there to the advanced section because that's probably where you are on IT. And you're interested in the things like the latest AI and the ML and all the other cool buzzwords that are coming out because you've probably been doing the minimum fundamentals for a while. OT, again, everyone's in a different place, but probably not the best place to start is, the really advanced solution where you don't even have basic patching and backups licked. So, important thing to keep in mind. If we go to the next slide, please. Just going to go through a quick case study. So with this particular customer of Honeywell was a major oil and gas provider in the Europe region. And in 2021, they kind of realized that they were falling behind on the OT side. Again, IT was pretty well under control, but on OT, they had a bunch of logs showing up, and they had a bunch of false positives, no tuning, none of the things in there that really got them to have value from those logs. So what they did here is they actually outsourced to Honeywell a managed security services type of agreement, where we take in that data, we're able to do the optimization and the false positive reduction, all those other types of things on a managed services basis. And again, for companies who decide to go with MSSPs, it often comes down to a business decision. There are very advanced companies who have said, strategically, we do not have it in our future to be the absolute best in cybersecurity. We know we're very good at producing oil or manufacturing or whatever, but we know we're not going to be able to hire and retain all of the skill set we need. So we're going to choose to outsource that to a company like Honeywell. So in this case, again, 24/7 monitoring, customer dashboards, and all the other things that come along with that. Another key thing, and this dovetails into what Steve said, regular tabletop exercises to make sure that your incident response plans work. So many cases you go in and you ask about incident response, and someone points to a dusty binder on the bookshelf that was created several years ago. No one's actually looked at it since it was created, and kind of the worst possible time to figure out if your incident response planning works is during an incident. So that's why tabletop exercises and that general regular exercise of your response plan is so important. All right, if we can go to the next slide, please. I think that wraps it up, and we're happy to take any questions you guys may have.